was a time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags, and neither was writing. People wrote books and movies that had stories, so you cared whose ass it was and why it was farting, and I believe that time can come again.
Hello and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. This is episode 48, and I am Captain Jack Sparrow. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I feel like we've been over it a bit, but we have people that I think will make this conversation a little more interesting than it has been in the past. We're talking about the differences between anarcho-capitalism and minarchism. And of course, no talk would be complete on this subject without I'll introduce our first guest, one Kyle Wagner. Kyle, how are you doing today, buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Vinny.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So Kyle, as many people know, I feel like at this point you don't even need an introduction. You're a bit of a celebritarian in your own right. Kyle runs the anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism debate group, which has recently turned into a steaming, burning garbage pile of shit.
I don't think so.
Sorry, Kyle.
It's always been, a lot of shit posting and a lot of memes and stuff like that. And unfortunately, it's gotten more of that, and it's even less debate. But there is still AVM debate in there.
There is some. I'm giving you a little heat because I think you would agree that I think the shit posting has been at a higher level than normal lately. But it seems like there's ebbs and flows. Like there'll be some like shit posting, but I think shit posters can only go for so long until it mellows itself out.
Yeah, it's also a very mature group. I mean, it's been over 3 years now in existence. I feel like I've heard and argued every angle of the anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism debate. So after a group's been around that long, you get a lot of the regulars, the long-termers have just sort of, they start to entertain themselves in other ways. So, it does go off topic all the time.
Yeah, things get off the rails pretty quickly, but like I said, it ebbs and flows. It finds its way back again. So also joining us then, we have a writer and contributor of the column. You may be familiar with it if you visit the site Being Libertarian. Lowdown on Liberty is the column, and Tj Eckert is the name of the author. TJ, how you doing tonight?
Hey, thanks for having me on board, Captain. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. We appreciate your time, man. I think this will be a good podcast. And if you haven't done it, go ahead to beinglibertarian.com and check out some of TJ's stuff. It's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good indeed.
Yeah, if you can stomach it, it's great. It's good for Ancap stuff.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And also joining us this evening is regular. I'm sure everyone is familiar with her by now. It's Cloven. Caitlin, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Been a long weekend, but glad to be at the end of it and on the podcast.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. So let's jump right into it. I figure we'll start off by establishing a little bit about kind of what each of these positions like stands for, what they mean. But instead of just kind of like going about the whole, I feel like you can go on a monologue for a bit, right? About like what defines anarcho-capitalism, what defines minarchism. So let's talk about it from like a philosophical sense, and we'll start with Kyle. What makes a minarchism, minarchism? What makes a minarchist a minarchist from a philosophical standpoint?
Well, it's like you said, it could be a really long definition, but in a nutshell, the government protects life and property from violent and fraudulent attacks. It's mostly a protection apparatus. And then, we debate about public property as well. I have come around to include public property, but the typical minarchist position is pretty much just police, courts, prisons and armed forces. So it's all sort of the coercive mechanism of the state is what the government is. And you don't have all these like extra agencies, the alphabet soup agencies. You don't have central banking. You don't have a welfare state. You don't have wealth redistribution. It's just extremely low taxes and a government that's mostly off to the side. It's not the middle of society. It's sort of like a referee that, if you ever watch ice hockey, like the ref tries to stay out of it. And that's sort of how the minarchist government tries to be in the market. It's there. It does referee the market, but it's it's not meant to get in the way and interfere for the most part, unless somebody really like breaks the rules, and then they call foul. So that's sort of in a nutshell. Like I said, some minarchists do add public property. Hazlitt in his books mentioned that government would do public works, would build roads. Bastiat mentioned that as well. Mises neglected that particular area, so unfortunately. But
when you say that, are you talking about like support for those systems?
Yeah, like, I mean, adding that as a role for government. I mean, that's what we were really discussing, is what should the role of government be in a free society or in a minarchist society. And I use the word liberal, which throws a lot of people off. But traditionally, the liberal position was capitalistic and with a limited government. And I would argue that our founding fathers, for the most part, were liberals, with some exceptions, but it was a liberal era as far as the prevailing body of thought, the prevailing ideology. Whereas today, I think that progressivism is the prevailing ideology. People expect government to provide unemployment insurance and retirement assistance and the environmental stuff. And we could go on for an hour of all the stuff people think government should do. Basically take care of everyone from cradle to grave. So it's a very parental system that we have now. But there are other principles. Mises outlines all of the principles of his political philosophy in his book, Liberalism, which is my main political influence. And, he includes democracy and tolerant, values, personal values like tolerance and peace. And peace is really the goal. One of his quotes is that peace is the father of all things and not war. And that in order for people to divide labor and produce, we need to be at a state of peace. And so the state's primary responsibility is to keep the peace.
Okay. And one more question for you before we move on to defining the other side of this discussion is, how would you define liberal then? Because I know that this word gets used a lot. A lot of times people see it as like a completely pejorative term. But a lot of people I know, especially like, the classical liberal guys, would take issue with the fact that this term has now been hijacked. So you used it a couple times in your breakdown. So how would you define liberal?
Well, I like to use tenets, the tenets of liberalism, the various principles, tenets or principles, whatever you want to call it. And I throw out that because that's easy for people to kind of say, okay, liberalism, and then here are the bullet points that make up liberalism, and one of them would be private owner. Probably the key tenet is private ownership of the means of production. You hear the Marxists; they want public ownership of the means of production, or worker ownership of the means of production. So we want private ownership of the means of production, limited government, democratic institutions, peace, tolerance.
Sure.
Gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head from the book the various. It's hard when you're on the spot.
No, it's all good. And when you say the book, you're talking about the liberalism, the Mises.
Yeah, Mises's book, Liberalism, which I recommend. Every libertarian should read that and understand where he's coming from with that.
I agree.
Yeah,
his work is very important. I agree. Okay, that's good. I think
I actually have the book right here. I can.
Very nice.
Yeah,
got it ready.
Yeah, let me see. Hang on. Let me see real quick from the table of contents.
Yeah,
if I missed anything. He says equality. The inequality of wealth and income, but equality is a value, and he does differentiate. He means equality under the law, not equal outcomes. But when you're before the judge, it doesn't matter that you're a rich man or a poor man. Justice doesn't care. So it's equality in the eyes of the law. Sure. And I think I pretty much covered all of the other important foundations of liberal property or liberal policy, which I covered property. Freedom is one I didn't mention, but the idea that individuals should be free to conduct themselves in the marketplace and conduct themselves in life, as long as they're not hurting someone. that they should be free to do what they choose. And it's a lot of it's based around choice. It's based around individual choice because, we want the person who's actually doing things and actually experiencing those consequences to make those decisions instead of a top-down, a bureaucrat making those decisions for him, like what happens in a centrally planned economy. So it's decentralized. It's still planned, but it's planned by the individual capitalists and not by the bureaucrats.
Right. And I think to most people who aren't getting really into the weeds, they'd go, well, that sounds reasonable. But we're gonna get into why there are some disagreements there. So, TJ, you are you're an anarcho-capitalist yourself. So why don't you, if you don't mind doing it, we can defer to somebody else if you'd like. But why don't you do the same for anarcho-capitalism? Maybe outline some of the principles or the positions that make anarcho-capitalism unique.
Yeah, so anarcho-capitalism is basically like what Kyle said. It's a lot in common with minarchism in that we have limited government, all that things, except for the fact that we disagree on everything he just said. So, I don't, it's basically that the tenets that they find to be able to be taken care of through government, we find to be unable to. So, for example, I don't find it to be a coincidence that things like the court, things like the military, things like the police, that minarchists want the government to take care of. Those are the biggest problems that we have in our society today. We have a corrupt court, we have a military that has gone awry, that literally cannot contain itself, and we have a police state that is unjustifiable and cannot be contained. And I think that is the problem with minarchism. Is what I would totally be a minarchist. I actually started off as a minarchist.
If you thought
the problem worked. Is that what's it?
I said if you thought it worked.
Yeah, the problem is after careful consideration, I think that the very core tenets of minarchism are exactly what's wrong with the state. So I don't believe that a police, a military, a court, I actually think that those are the number one thing that needs to be privatized and done away with by state control right off the rip, just because they're incapable of. So that is the main difference, I would say, between anarcho-capitalism and minarchism, is that, where they have a general agreement that the state can do a couple things well, I would say that anarcho-capitalism would say that the very things that minarchists like the state to do would be the number one things that anarcho-capitalists don't want the state to do. Like if you gave me a choice on the few things, if you, like right today, like if you said, what are the things that you want to cut the government out of right now? It'd probably be the same exact things that minarchists think the government can run, being the military, the police, the courts. Those are the things that the state has to be cut out of right off the rip, if nothing else.
Right.
And that would be the main difference.
Yeah, because the Ancap, and please, keep me honest, correct me if I'm wrong, the Ancap is going to look at it and go, okay, so that's your idea, and it's never worked.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I agree. If we could keep the government in check, that'd be fantastic. Minarchists and anarcho-capitalists can get along just as well. Like Jason Stapleton says, it's like a bus. We ride it one way towards less government, and if we could just stay on the bus together, that'd be great. But at some point, we do have to depart from what we wish to what is, what's going to happen. And that's the problem with anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism is I don't think it's a coincidence that, the worst parts of the state are the exact parts that minarchists want to keep around. The military industrial complex, the police state, things like that, the court, the unjust court system. It's not a coincidence that they are the worst.
Yeah, well, it's like there's it's like the quippy Ancap comeback is like, oh yeah, minarchism's great. They want to do away with all the government except for the important stuff.
Basically, except for the worst parts of it. That's fine.
Right. And to be clear too, so I just said, it never worked. When I say it never worked, that's according to like, if you go according to Kyle's definition that he said, right, a limited government. So if you look around, clearly we are not living in a limited government. So it's one. But to give Kyle,
to agree with Kyle, I mean, we do have the same tenets that we agree on, peace being number one. anarcho-capitalists and minarchists can absolutely agree on that peace needs to be number one. That's the goal there.
Right.
It's just the means that we disagree on. So I do agree that minarchists and anarcho-capitalists can, for the most part, get along with each other, especially when it comes to criticizing what's wrong with the state today. I mean, there's so much to make fun of.
Yeah, we're all good.
There's so much to criticize. Yeah, that we can basically hold hands and get along there. It's just when you get down to nit and grit that we tend to part ways.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think, and especially, I mean, look, maybe it's where you're starting the discussions that people get a little mixed up at, because I feel like a lot of times, and especially in these debates and these like little closed off like online areas, we get so used to the fact that in these closed off online areas, we're primarily surrounded by other libertarians. So it becomes like a purity contest really quickly. Because it's not like in real life where you're sitting around with like a bunch of Democrats and maybe like there's a Bernie fan over here, right? We got a Trump supporters. We got all these different people. But you go into this libertarian space and it really does become like a conquest for purity really quickly. So the place it starts at the exactly different, the opposite end that these conversations normally start at. And it's like you're either an extreme in one end or an extreme on the other. And people tend to get against each other. Like there's a lot of big differences there, but kind of like you said, I feel like the two sides agree on more than they don't. And especially when you consider all the work that has to be done, if either one of them is to have any semblance of what they want, there's a lot of work to do before I think either side is happy.
Yeah, I would agree. I tend to think that we have a lot of work ahead of us, and it's more agreement than disagreement at this point, depending based on the status quo.
Yeah. And I know that there's some stuff that, so we talked about, we feel that it's compatible. So before we get into why we think it's compatible, let's talk for a minute about why it might be incompatible. Now, I know that Kyle specifically doesn't feel like these two groups are great at working together, and I'd like to hear why, Kyle.
Yeah, I've heard the bus analogy or a train analogy where we're all together until the end, and then, Ancaps are going to keep going and abolish or privatize the police and the legal system and the justice system. I think one of the problems is like the trying to imagine a fully privatized society doesn't work conceptually. And it screws up, you have to tell people what your final vision is. Like, what is your objective? And if you have different objectives, you're going to have different strategies. And a perfect example is if your objective is to abolish the government and to make people withdraw their mental support of government, you're telling people voting is aggression, don't vote, it only encourages them, don't engage in the political process, don't run for office. So you're doing things that are actually contradictory to what our objectives are as minarchists, which is to take over the government and then cut the spending and cut the taxes and bring the troops home. So we have policy objectives, whereas an anarchist, it's almost a walking contradiction for you to be standing on a podium and saying, elect me, when your objective is to abolish the very office that you're running for. So that's just one of the many incompatibilities that we have. Another incompatibility is I feel like anarchists, the ideology is so rebellious and so anti-authority and so anti-government that they are abrasive to people, and they actually end up offending people to the point where it's like you just can't say that kind of stuff. You can't compare teachers negatively to racists or I forget what Arvin's exact analogy was, but
rapists. Didn't he call teachers rapists or something?
I think I would agree with Kyle that we don't, as an anarcho-capitalist, I don't agree with Arvin's marketing. So
yeah,
there's throw that out there.
There's very little sense of how things come across to, I'll say, normal or centrist kind of people, because they don't really care, because they're not trying to get elected. That's not the objective.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think that's an ideology problem. I think that's a messaging problem, or
I would agree.
An issue with, radical versus pragmatic messaging. I'm an Ancap. I want recreational McNukes and the whole nine.
I mean, if you look at,
I'm not going to go out and tell a Democrat that I want recreational McNukes. It's all about how you package it. But yeah, I wouldn't say that's an ideological difference, although there is a vast number of ANCAPs that go out there and, the strategy is very different. But I think that's just those who see the value in pragmatism.
The problem is I think a lot of anarcho-capitalists do the marketing thing very, very poorly. And that's the thing, is that I'm an anarcho-capitalist, but I understand that there is an essence of pragmatism. So yes, if you want to talk about, ideology, all these things, principles, I can talk that all day, but to sit there and make fun of the pragmatic side, I actually don't disagree with them. So for example, I know that we'll just throw this out here, like the Mises Institute and the Libertarian Party, they do not see eye to eye at all. And I think that's kind of a lost cause. I think that's kind of a missed connection, because yes, I don't agree with what the Libertarian Party is doing right now, but to acknowledge what we have today and where we need to go as an anarcho-capitalist, there's a path there. And I think what needs to happen is that the Libertarian Party ought to be doing marketing to people that are minarchists, or not even minarchists, classical liberals, people that are even just dipping their toes in the water for libertarian for the first time. And what they need to do is they need to be, doing the pragmatic side and then kicking people over to institutions like the Mises Institute to get the hardcore, they ought to be working together. There's two wings here, and it ought to be.
It's a funnel of people, and it's how you continue your marketing. That's how you get your principled candidates and your
exactly.
Someone there. You have to keep the education going. You can't just get your one issue voters and call it a day and hope they vote libertarian next time around.
Yeah, and the Libertarian Party is doing okay there, but someone who's a Republican that just for the first time is hearing libertarianism and is questioning their faith in Donald Trump or whatever, they ought to be able to turn to the Libertarian Party, get their feet wet in what we think about, and then the Libertarian Party, if they were smart, ought to be kicking those things over to things like the Mises Institute to be like, listen, this is what we believe in, this is our pragmatic side, but our principled side is here. And you ought
to
go look at them, and they ought to be working together. And this kind of inside baseball where they hate each other is really self-defeating, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
And,
well, I think that's in part to how we get caught in our echo chambers. We don't go out and we don't talk to the two parties and unaffiliated
and it's like
as much. We get so stuck in our echo chambers that our differences are amplified 1,000 times, that we see each other as enemies, even though we're so close. And even though some of us have different strategy, we're still super close in ideology.
Absolutely. And the problem is people tend to think that we can't get caught in an echo chamber just because we don't have the mainstream media. Compared to the mainstream media, it's like, oh my God, those guys are in an echo chamber. And it's like, yeah, let's not forget, it's not that difficult for us to get caught in our own echo chamber.
I think it's easier, actually, because most of us are online. You have Democrats and Republicans everywhere, whether they're online or not. The majority of libertarians keep in touch online, so I find it easier for libertarians to get stuck in echo chambers. You find these Facebook groups where they're talking about selling heroin to 5-year-olds. That is such an insane concept to be talking about in the mainstream. That's how deep they are.
Yeah, and that's not a good way to break it in. It's almost like we need to recognize that the Libertarian Party, the minarchists, things like that is a great way to break someone. I didn't start as an ANCAP. So to think that I'm going to break someone in by pushing anarcho-capitalism on somebody is unrealistic.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes you can get the right person and the right messaging strategy where you turn a ANCAP right away, but not how it works.
Let's not pretend like that's the ideal message, though.
I started out worse than a minarchist. I wanted roads. I wanted government roads.
There you go. That's just for your kids. That's the way to go. Just for everyone, get the roads. Let's go. No, and the problem is that I think it's just an understanding. And no offense to Kyle, but eventually, I was a minarchist, and then you just kind of come to recognize that, man, you're sitting there and you hate the state, and like we said, we have the same goals with peace and all that stuff, anti-war, and then you start to look and you're like, man, the court system is really messed up. I don't think the state could run that, and you're like, man, the police. I don't know if the state could run that, and it's like a gradual thing. How's the saying go? That it's very gradual and then it's very sudden. You have these gradual steps, and then it's like a big push in the back, and you're like, whoa, this cannot work with the state involved at all.
Well,
and then you
Well, I think in defense of minarchism, like if you don't have, the alphabet soup agencies and you don't have this massive overreaching government, that they would be able to focus on, courts and justice and all this and be able to do it much better.
I disagree.
Well, so here's
I do too, but I think that's the premise behind it.
Here's the problem, though, right? So the issue isn't are these things like I guess. I tend to agree, Caitlin, with what you're saying in that, like, if you strip it away, it could work and this and that, right? But the issue is, and this falls back to kind of the Ancap thing. And so what's interesting here is I'm actually going to quote someone who's not an Ancap, who, shocker, that I'm sure everyone's going to be real surprised that I am quoting this individual. But Hayek himself has said emergencies have always been the pretext in which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded. So I love that quote. And I think it's relevant here because it's not necessarily like, I don't think the government ever, like when we talk about incrementalism and stuff like this, I think it happens under the guise of not of government growth. It happens under the guise of safety or security, right? We get in an extreme situation, we get in an emergency type situation, and then the government's going to come and say, okay, well, due to this situation and due to a need for safety, we're going to enact this policy. And then what ends up happening is that policy never goes away, right? That policy sticks around, and what it was meant to do is no longer needed, but that power of that policy is still there, and it gets used for other things. And that's when you get this growth, this crazy growth. Is we these things are added in times of emergency that give the government great power, and they are never scaled back.
Sure,
like FDR.
Yeah, well, and that's what Jonathan Rauch, if you guys have heard the book, Government's End, he talks about that. The term is called hyperpluralism, where you get these government programs and they actually start to compete against one another, and you get these competing interests that cannot help but try to get more money for themselves at the expense of what the original end goal is that they were created to do. So you look at farm subsidies, you look at unions, you look at things like that, and it's like, yeah, sure, they were created with the best intentions. We can all agree on that, sure. But what happens is they're actually forced by government to compete against one another because you have this monopoly on who controls the money and who has the authority on force. And they compete against one another to the point where they're distorted, and they actually end up harming the exact causes that they were created to help. And that is the essence of government. And it's like, the sooner you understand that, the sooner you realize that things like courts, police, military cannot be run by them. They just cannot. They get perverted, and they just end up harming the exact people that we, minarchists and anarcho-capitalists want to help.
So you bring up a good point about them, creating these things, and since they have a monopoly and then they start competing against each other, if they didn't have that monopoly and these were, private solutions to things and they were competing against each other, it would be a great thing. And that's kind of the premise of anarcho-capitalism. You have your Ancaps who are super dogmatic, and they're like, well, this is how this will be handled, and this is how, this other issue will be handled. Well, that's not really the case. I mean, you're going to all it is basically like privatization and competition of services the government provides.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, as an anarcho-capitalist, one of the criticisms I have is it's, as a minarchist, someone who is a minarchist, if you have all these, you understand that we need to have competition in all these different areas. What is the problem with having competition in things like a police state or, giving a military, like what is the problem with having a competition in that area? Someone like Kyle, I'd be interested in hearing what's wrong with having competition in those same areas that minarchists want the government to have a monopoly on.
You'd get faction wars. So you would get, the progressives or Democrats would hire their police and they would try to kill you, and the fascists would try to kill you, and the socialists would try to kill you, and everybody who doesn't agree with anarcho-capitalism would try to kill you. So the only way to maintain order is to have a monopoly over the top that just keeps everybody from fighting. The people, we will fight over resources, and we will fight over assets and power and control of land and territory. There's this idea that everything's going to be privatized is a complete fiction.
So then you disagree with Rothbard's take that private police forces like that, they really actually have an incentive not to fight with one another because of the costs involved?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, if you're going to set up your own police force, you're going to run into the state. you're going to be fighting with the state. So it immediately leads to civil war because you're enemies of the state. So it's like, if you want to, you're going to challenge the state police and you're going to challenge the government, the state military, you're going to challenge the monopoly. Immediately, the competition of violence that you're asking for is war.
But the problem you're even admitting that the problem is the state, not the private military. So I'm saying, like,
it doesn't really matter. I mean, you say, okay, well, it's your fault. The point is there's a conflict, right? Because you're challenging the monopoly of violence with your own private violence, and so there's a conflict. So we get a society of civil war.
Well, is this
and then hold on, let me finish. Okay. And then whoever wins becomes the new government. You know, if you come out on top, you're the new boss. And Ancaps it's a contradiction for Ancaps to rule. Ancaps cannot, by definition, be in charge. You know?
Okay, but anarcho-capitalists don't say that they're in charge. I mean, so then how do you square what Hoppe says about the idea that right now with you know, we have different nations, we have 200 nations around the world, that they don't, you know, if we took what you're saying to its logical conclusion, we would need a one world government, a top down, to keep these nations from being in civil war with one another. But yet
you don't, because you have political boundaries separating each country. So as long as each country just has a monopoly within its territory and there's no overlap, and they both are okay with that border and they stay on their side of the border, then you don't have that conflict.
And we
have
a monopoly within
property? That territory. You have you can't do it with private property. It's first of all, you're taking the position that you're the authority and that we're going to have private property. You don't understand where private property comes from. We have private property because the government says this land is that guy's, this land is that guy's. It's a mandate from the law. It's not just a default. It's not just a given. And I think a lot of anarcho-capitalists, because they think private property rights are natural or automatic, they think that with no government, it just defaults to private property. That's not how it works. If there's no government, everyone fights over every square inch of land, and whoever wins those conflicts is who gets it. It's not a happy handshake agreement where everybody just sort of respects each other. Like humans literally fight over land.
Yeah, when they're especially, I would agree with you, when they're poor or they don't have a subsistence living. But you think in first worlds that people would just randomly fight over to the death, like different parts of property that they want?
Absolutely. Absolutely they would.
Though.
Look at the violence that we see today, even in like Charlottesville and with the alt-right fighting with the Antifa. Like, people are freaking nuts.
I'm going to stop you right there, though.
You think go ahead, Vinny.
I pose this question, right? Because I think you guys are talking about two different things. And I think that TJ asked a question, because I think that the only reason I'm clarifying is I think this is actually a really fascinating discussion, and I want to keep it on track, but I think we got a little bit off track in that TJ is asking about the battle over scarce resources, right, in first world countries. I actually think is a very interesting question. And Kyle, I feel like your answer kind of speaks to people that are fighting to gain control of the pendulum of control, right? So when we talk about some of the political rhetoric and the political violence that's going on right now, I feel like these are fights over the left and the right over who gets control so they can impose their will on everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? Which is fair. That is politics, but that's politics when there is a body in control, right? And so
that's a pragmatic approach.
Yeah, but you're not in a position to take that power structure away. They would just become the government. If it wasn't there, whatever the largest group was, whatever the most violent group was, they would just establish dominance. Like, how are Ancaps going to stop them?
Ancaps won't stop them. There will be governments in Ancapistan. Yeah, because they're going to have communities that form, and
there's nothing wrong with that, though.
Ethical standards, they're going to want a government.
By definition,
you're going to have different property rights.
It's a contradiction of anarchy to have governments.
That's not a contradiction. The contradiction is the force involved. People that are if you had a group of people that wanted to get together and have a commune or whatever, I mean, that's not a contradiction of anarcho-capitalism. The contradiction is forcing everyone else around through this top-down monopoly on aggression to come along and join them on this journey. That's the contradiction, and that's what we're against. If people wanted to have a government, by all means, go for it. It's just, if I don't, which I do not.
Ancapistan is not like a worldwide thing. It's not everyone's going to live in Ancapistan. That's our preference as anarchists. But you're going to have Ancom societies. You're going to have LibSoc societies. You're going to have Democrats and Republicans and every other imaginable, standards and communities all over the world. It's not this, one world order of Ancapistan. It's just kind of like resetting.
Well, you're talking about carving out your own territory that's going to be Ancapistan, your own country.
By decentralization, yes, you can do that.
Yeah, but in order to
say your
carve
own
out
country, Kyle, what if it was just a neighborhood?
Well, hey, I'd like to hear Kyle, where were you going? I'm interested in what you were saying.
In order to carve out Ancapistan, and Ancapistan is going to have Ancap law in that territory, that there's going to be some people in that area that are not happy with that. And that's where you have a coercion problem. You think that force is a bad thing. And it's you have to understand, when you establish a set of rules for people that everybody has to follow, even if it's something as simple as the NAP, it has to be backed up by some pretty serious force. And this is where ANCAPs have a coercion problem. They do not have enough force in order to make people submit to the non-aggression principle or comply with their contracts. And they might think that they do because they think that they're tough, but it's there's always somebody richer and more powerful than you that is going to be able to beat you when push comes to shove.
Why do you think that, though? I mean, we see that decentralization actually defeats a top-down army time and time again. I mean, it's literally, you cannot. It's been a rule since Sun Tzu wrote his book on war that the biggest governments in the world cannot defeat decentralized armies. I mean, we gained independence by that fighting force, and we lost to Vietnam by that force. I mean, we've been losing in Iraq by that force. I mean, why do you think that just because there's a top-down force that
that's a great point.
That's just not true. It flies in the face of every
wrong.
Empirical evidence that we have.
You're making the assumption that the people of America are going to actually fight against the U.S. government, whereas most people are going to think you guys are domestic terrorists. They're not going to be on ANCAP's side. So who are the decentralized forces that are going to join you in your war against the state? They don't exist.
What's your entire argument?
Local police department, let alone the U.S. military.
But your entire argument rests
how powerful they are.
Your entire argument rests on the fact that the state is still the problem. You're saying, yeah, okay, so I could give you your point, Kyle. Say, yeah, okay, so sure, what if we don't have enough people to fight against the state? But the problem is still the state, not the people that are fighting against it. The problem is the state trying to hold on to that aggression over its monopoly hold over people.
No,
and
the problem
is to swing the idea that we're domestic terrorists and all this stuff, when really all we want is non-aggression. I mean, you say that we need this monopoly over aggression, even though we don't.
We do.
We don't. I mean, the problem is the difference is that there's a difference between initiating violence and not initiating violence. There's defensive aggression or a defensive force versus aggression.
Yeah, but you guys aren't in power to define that. You don't get to say what's aggressive, what's not aggressive. You're not lawmakers. And so ANCAPs envision themselves. Let me finish. ANCAPs envision themselves as the power, and you guys are not the authority on what's aggression, what's not aggression.
So
and in different social systems, what's considered aggression is different based on the property rules. So if you try to claim private property in a socialist system, you're the lawbreaker. You would be considered the aggressor, and you would be thrown in jail for taking something that rightfully belongs to the public, to the state.
That's why there's freedom of association.
It depends. The aggression is subjective. It depends on your property rules, and ANCAPs take their version of property rules and assume that that's going to be, the authoritative stance. And
but we don't. I don't agree. I think that in in a anarcho-capitalist situation, that there would be competing types of property, like private property laws, like different concepts of what makes up private property, things like that. And that's fine. I think that some people would disagree with what I consider to be private property laws versus someone else. It's okay. The difference is, like you said, the nonviolence is that people aren't dragged along to ideas that they don't agree with unnecessarily.
They're not, TJ, they have no obligation to not be violent. There is no authority to say you're not allowed to aggress or you're not allowed to do whatever. Like, you can do whatever you want. You can shoot somebody in the face because they looked at you funny, because it's anarchy, and that's what anarchy is.
But
like, it has no binding.
You're assuming that
it has no binding legal code over the top of rules that people have to follow.
But why do you keep hinging on this legal rule? I mean, no offense, but fuck laws. I mean, I don't care about laws.
Yeah, that's the kind of mentality that people that shoot people in the face over nothing have, is fuck laws.
But in my defense,
that's why anarchists burn cars and they break banks, they smash windows, and they try to kill people because
those are Ancaps.
Yeah, I was saying
those are real anarchists. You guys are fakes. You guys are posers. You're not real anarchists.
Why would you say that?
Wow.
Because real anarchists are not pacifists. They are assholes.
Why would you say that? Do you live your life based on the idea that people you come in contact with on a daily basis want to kill you, if not for the state laws? I mean, that would be a sad way to live.
Not everybody, but there's definitely some nut jobs out there, and you have to recognize.
But what percentage of that? Let's be real.
You have to recognize that they exist, and that you need some mechanism to put them in jail when they hurt people.
But anarcho-capitalism totally has those. You act like they have no recollection of like putting those people in jail. Like, let's be honest though, what percentage of those people is it? Is it 0.1% or is it 99%? And you're arguing as if 99% of people, if given the option right now, if I was sitting in a restaurant with you, Kyle, and all of a sudden someone came in and goes, no rules, you can kill whoever you want, you think that the majority of people would get up and just start beating the shit out of people? And it's like, no. And the truth is,
no, but that's because we live under the state.
That's not true.
We live under the state.
That's not true.
When you have political unrest, when you have an unstable government, you can look at any country that has political unrest. It is extremely violent.
No, that's not true at all.
People form groups. Yes, they do. They form groups. Look at Iraq after we took out Saddam. Look at the power struggle. You know,
that's bullshit, though. You're literally saying so.
Like,
hold on.
Have you ever heard that saying?
You can't sit there and use Iraq as an example of anarchy when it's literally got our government and our military like in it, and they haven't left.
It absolutely it was
to prop up
is when there's no established political rule, and it's a state of political unrest, and it ends as soon as somebody reestablishes
political
Can I interject there? Can I interject?
Nowhere is it ever last, because
this is the problem I have with minarchists, is that you are saying that, okay, so a system like Iraq that literally took the opposite of Ancap ideas and ran with it to the fullest extent. So Iraq ran with the biggest these big social programs and all this top-down bullshit from governments. And then as soon as they didn't work, the government literally implodes in on itself. It makes everyone poor to the point where they are starving to death and in subsistence living. And then all of a sudden they start attacking each other, and you go, oh, look, now that the government subsided, oh yeah, look, anarchy doesn't work. And that's such bullshit. In what world?
That's not what happened at all. We took Saddam out, and look at situations
But look at situations like what's going on in Mexico right now with Sharon. Like, they haven't had a government in a couple years now, and they are in the most violent part of Mexico. They're in the most violent part of Mexico.
Yeah, but
they haven't had
part of Mexico.
They're not part of Mexico. They're literally completely. Mexico is not trying to mess with them at all, and they haven't had a violent crime take place since 2011.
But this is in Mexico.
It's in Mexico. It's within the territory of Mexico, but they have no government. They have literally no politician is allowed in there.
They have the government of Mexico.
No, they don't. Are you familiar with Sharon? Are you familiar with this?
I'm not. But
okay, it sounds like you aren't. It's literally
like it's a town in Mexico.
It's not. It's 30. It's a city of 30,000 people that is not under Mexican rule. They literally threw all the politicians out in 2011. They have not had a violent crime since 2011. It's basically a microcosm of anarchy working in a non-violent way.
I'm going to do some research. I'm betting that they still have some police. They still have some.
But that's the thing. Don't misrepresent and say that anarcho-capitalists don't have police. They just don't have a monopoly on police. Yeah, they have private.
It has to be a monopoly.
So then that flies in the face of what Hoppe says.
So then DJ police forces. That makes no sense.
We have.
But you make so Kyle, that makes no sense. So why if you need a monopoly on police, why don't we need a monopoly on a world police? Why is it that individual countries can interact with one another and have these you have business
because they have boundaries. I already explained that to you.
And you don't. But anarcho-capitalists talk about boundaries all the time, and you're rejecting them.
Because you need power to make boundaries. You don't.
We have power to make boundaries.
No, you don't. You're an anarchist. You don't have power to do shit. You're not drawing any property lines.
Okay, guys.
No, you're not. And if you think you are, somebody's going to just walk across it and say, "What are you going to do?"
Okay, and then if I stop them, what's the problem? I don't understand.
You're not going to stop them. They're going to shoot you just as easy as you can shoot them.
And I'm okay with that. Bring it on. Like that's my point.
Bring it on.
I'm willing.
Exactly the attitude that you guys have. Bring it on.
Okay.
And fortunately for you,
there's a lot of generalization going on here.
They could easily kill you.
Kyle, you're assuming that you keep saying you're like, unfortunately for me, this is work, but I can name you plenty of miniature examples of this working out. I mean, can you I don't understand why you think this isn't going to work.
Why don't you move there? I mean, it doesn't
because
exist.
That's not how property rights work, man. I don't.
As a narco-capitalist, it doesn't exist anywhere in the world.
I'm sorry, but
anywhere in the world.
That's not how political authority works. Have you read? I mean, it's not like, hey, man, you move here. It's like, okay, well, that's how property rights work. It's like, I hate you, you hate me. Well, give up your house and move. Why should I give up my house? Why don't you move?
No.
Okay. And then you come to an agreement.
Fight.
All right, hold on, you guys.
I'm fine with that. That's okay. Right. I'm okay.
It's not okay. It's not okay with everybody.
You're the one that's thinking of
That's why it's a shitty ideology because you're telling people
because you're scared of defending your property. I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody else doesn't want to fight, like little grandmothers and stuff. They don't want to have to fight. But I thought you said everyone else defend their house. Like that's ridiculous.
You think again
police like normal people.
All right. So do you think that in anarcho-capitalism that it would be like The Purge, like the movie where people are just like killing each other?
No, because it doesn't exist. It's completely fictitious.
But I'm saying,
it is technically impossible.
Well, what is your gripe with it?
Because if anarcho-capitalists are ruling over an area, they become the government of that area.
It's not possible. Why do you think that?
Yes, it does. Because somebody has to be the in power. Somebody is always in charge.
Why do you need someone to be in control of you? I don't understand.
So I have a question. Okay, hold on, you guys. Hold on. Calm down. I have a question. I think something here that is getting a little confusing, right? So, and we've gotten into this before a little bit, but it's kind of like the definition of anarchy. I think gets a little muddied here, but I will ask. So some people would argue that the definition of anarchy can technically be just a lack of a central authority, right? A central monopoly on violence. I would ask, so Kyle, do you not think that that's a sufficient definition for anarchy, right? So to basically say to remove a monopoly on governance, right? So that's to say to make it available that any governance can exist. And so this kind of goes back to a little bit of what was a topic of contention in what has been topics of contention for the last 15 minutes, but a topic of contention before, which was like, this can exist and this can exist. And you say, well, no, it can't. It'll turn into a power vacuum. Do you not think that the ability for governance to exist outside, like, so it's not just a monopoly, do you think that that's a fair definition of anarchy? Or do you think that once governance shows up, it's no longer anarchy?
Yeah, I agree with both of the statements that you made. I guess it's a fair enough definition. You know, I just don't see ANCAPs ever having their own country. I think that doesn't even make sense for anarchists to have a country of their own.
I'm not sure anarchists want their own country.
I think that would mean that, ANCAPs were the ruling party, essentially.
I can see where you're coming from with that. So
right.
we only
and that would be involuntary to everybody else. Like all the other ideologies that were there would be like, hey, we don't like this. We didn't agree to this.
And that's fair. That's fair. So to your point there, I will say, so one of the things that someone brought up once to me that was interesting as a argument, I guess, to Hoppa's covenant communities is they said, well, like, what if someone, right. So essentially for anyone listening that might not be familiar, they talk about Hoppa and how he's got his idea of covenant communities, and the communities can set the standards for themselves and whatever. And someone raised a question that I thought was fair and interesting, which is what happens when someone is born into that community, who is something that the community is against. Right. And so let's say, for instance, the community is against homosexuals and someone is born and then ends up being a homosexual. Well, now you might have a situation on your hands. So I thought that was an interesting question posed. That's, I guess, something that we can spin around in our heads a little bit, but we don't have so much time left. I did want to ask really quickly, and I'll challenge you, Kyle. What do you think are some strengths of the philosophy behind anarcho-capitalism?
Obviously, I'm not a fan of it.
Right. We've gathered.
I understand it's a trap that I fell into. I think I followed the same route that a lot of people followed, which was Ron Paul led me to Rothbard and the Mises Institute, and I started to believe in this ideology. And then, after reading Mises, I switched back. And so I guess the where there's overlap with classical liberalism, I agree, but I think that it removes the essential protections that we need, the state protection that we actually do need. And I do think the state is the foundation of a society, and that anarchist thought leads one into direct conflict with the state and with statists. So I guess the overlap would be the peace, the free market, privatization. I just don't think that in fact, I know that you can't privatize government services. It makes no sense that you would have your own private police force and that it would compel other people to do what you want. I mean, that's just not going to work. Okay. So the society's not going to tolerate that. And
you understand there's more private security officers than there are police in the country right now.
Well, these are security officers. They're not police, and they're subject to the law. They're subject to the law. So, you can't just pay a hitman to go kill somebody because that's illegal, and then the government.
But no one's arguing that. I'm not arguing to have hitmen.
Right, but see, that's what your philosophy leads to. There's no check on any.
Oh, well, no, hold on.
No one's arguing that. Like, where you're making these logical jumps?
No, Ancap has ever written a book, and they're like chapter 7, mercenaries. Like, no one.
Right,
you're making big logical jumps here, man.
They all envision some restriction. They envision a legal code or some restriction that they themselves would write. So they really envision themselves.
That's
governing.
Not true at all, though. We envision competing. You could have, just like you have competition in everything else. You have competition in laws. You have competition in morality.
Right.
What's wrong with that?
How are we going to have competition in laws? That doesn't even make sense.
Why? Why not?
My law is better than your law. Like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
But don't you understand that
it's literally happening now.
Human beings given the opportunity will disassociate before they go to war. Like, the only reason that wars happen over governments, they don't happen because people want to kill each other. Given the opportunity, people disassociate from one another, and that's what would happen in an anarcho society.
You're living in a fantasy world. When people get pissed off, they hurt each other. They'll shoot each other. I mean, I live in Baltimore. I'm telling you, it's people get killed over nothing.
People get killed because they are held in government.
People just disassociate. No, they'll try to hurt each other. That's
Why?
what they do.
Why do you think that? I don't understand. I couldn't imagine living my life thinking that everyone I come in contact with wants to kill me if it not for this savior of government. Like,
not everyone, but if you actually have a real dispute with somebody, it could escalate to death really quick.
Why would I have a dispute with somebody when I could just disassociate?
You can't necessarily disassociate. Sometimes people want what you have.
That's true. I agree. That is true. Sometimes people want it. But don't you agree that would be a small minority compared to what we're talking about here?
No, I think you guys don't realize how many people hate anarcho-capitalist ideas, hate even minarchist ideas, and think that, honestly, there are people that think all of us should be killed. Like literally, there are other ideologies out there. There are socialists.
There's some people, I would agree.
There are a lot of people out there that hate these ideas, and it's all well and good to talk about it. But as soon as you try to cut one nickel out of Social Security, all of a sudden they're going nuts.
Well, doesn't a little part of you, all right, on a totally sarcastic point, doesn't a little part of you, Kyle, just say like, bring it on? Like, just be like, all right, those guys that are like, hey man, we want to kill you over Social Security. I a little part of me goes like, okay,
let's do it, boomers. Let's go.
Like Civil War when?
That's what the anarchist thinking leads you to. Is it leads you to conflict with other people.
No, the conflict is with the people that want to kill me. I want no conflict with. How can you say that I want the conflict? I'm literally telling you I don't want the conflict.
You know, the people that love America, love the flag, like you're already against most of society. And I don't think a lot of Ancaps realize that.
Let me pose the same question then, and we'll pose it to the Ancaps this time. So Ancaps, what do you see as some strengths from the minarchist arguing position? I'll actually start, and I'll say that one of the strengths I see from the minarchism position is that I think it's easier to have discussions with people from a minarchist position. I think that the Ancap positions are pretty radical. And when you're like, to Kyle's point, there's a lot of people out there who don't agree with these ideas, like even libertarian ideas. And I feel like from a minarchist position, one of the advantages that they have is they can probably have discussions with people a little bit easier. Because when it gets to a point when like an Ancap's talking about something, someone will say like, well, what about the police, right? And the Ancaps are like, fuck them. And the minarchist is able to say, no, police are fine. And I feel like that's easier to talk to people that are unfamiliar with libertarian ideas when you're coming from the minarchist standpoint.
I think minarchists are great in many, many aspects. And the thing is, because you're absolutely right, Vinny, because we can have a conversation. I can't talk to someone like Owen Jones over in England who says that private charity is bad. Right. And that you need to just pay your taxes. I could talk to Kyle about private property rights. I could talk to him about non-aggression. And the problem is, or I wouldn't say the problem. The good thing is that's our key issue. So the main tenets of what make minarchism and anarcho-capitalism kind of look like the same thing to someone from the outside. I mean, if you took a socialist and you showed me and Kyle's viewpoints, we'd be the same person to them.
Right.
They'd be like, oh yeah, those people are the same people. And it's exactly what keeps us, what makes us the same, the non-aggression, private property rights, the fact that the state, yes, well, I would agree it's a completely unnecessary evil. Kyle might say something like it's a necessary evil, but we do agree that it's an evil.
No, we don't agree.
Oh, we don't agree there? Oh, okay. Well,
hold on. Let's not get in the weeds.
I mean, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you're good, man. So you don't agree that the state is a necessary evil at all? Like, you just don't think it's evil No,
I think once we decide something is beneficial and necessary for society, it's not right to call it an evil anymore. And I think, even good and evil.
Don't you think the state can go too far, though?
Subjective value judgment. And when the state arrests a Ted Bundy or Kemper, a serial killer, or
but how about when it arrests a Brian Banks?
Criminal, I don't see how you can say that's evil.
Well,
I wouldn't say that's evil, but do you think that the state is the only one that could accomplish that?
Well, and you just named two people that are like very clearly murderers. So how about all the people that get arrested that shouldn't have been?
In the history of 7 billion people. Like,
how about all the people that get arrested that shouldn't have ever been arrested?
Well, I mean,
how about all the people that got shot that had no business getting shot?
That's typically when you talk about people that get arrested that shouldn't get arrested. You're usually talking about
a lot of people.
Drugs.
No, you're talking about a lot of people for a lot of stuff. There's people. Okay, so I mentioned Brian Banks. That's a rape allegation that was untrue, and that's not it. That's not just drugs. There's people that are convicted of murder that never murdered anybody.
I mean, what about Ross Ulbricht?
In the anarcho-capitalist society, if anybody wants to arrest them, they can arrest them.
Well, okay, hold on. Let me keep you honest, though. Let me keep you honest. We're not talking about Ancap. You were talking about, you were talking, what you said is that we're going to take this, and then when the rules are established, that's the rules, and that's how they go. And then people don't argue about it after the rules are in place because it's helpful, it's good, and it's not evil. And my question is, what happened when it becomes evil? What happens when the rules aren't working out the way that they were supposed to work out? What happens when innocent people are being put behind bars? What happens when people are being shot for holding cell phones? That's not evil?
Yeah. Well, I would say it is, but I think that's where politics comes in. That's where we come in and say,
What good is
look, we need
politics
to
doing right
change
now?
these laws, but these are the laws that society currently wants. So these are the laws that the police currently enforce.
I don't think that society wants these laws. Have you seen a lot of videos about people saying that they're glad that black people are getting shot by police? I've not seen nearly as many of those as I've seen videos about people saying that cops should not be the judge, jury, and executioner, and the ones that completely and absolutely continue to analyze themselves and come to the decision that they have done nothing wrong.
I mean, why do you think that most crimes happen in public spaces, spaces that the government owns, places like alleyways, streets? You don't hear about that these crimes happen in private areas like malls. Like places happen in you hear about them happening where the government has jurisdiction over, I put in quotations, jurisdiction over the property. And the problem is because government is awful at enforcing these laws, at maintaining people's safety.
Well, how about this guy? We've got this guy that just sent all these bombs, right? And so if you want to look at it, let's put it like this. So everyone that wants gun control, they're going around. I think we all probably agree on the gun control thing, or at least I hope we would. They go around talking about, okay, what we need to do is we need to increase background checks, this, that, and the other. But then we turn around and we got this guy that's sending these mail bombs. This guy committed a felony in 2002.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. Why do you think he sent him through the post office? PS. Why do you think he sent it through the post office and not FedEx?
No, that's a great question. And not only that question, but also he's registered to vote in March of 2016. Why did he register? Since when were felons allowed to register to vote? Right, and so
I think you can restore.
I think felons should be okay to vote. I'm not against felons getting their rights back. So
no, I'm pretty sure there's a process where you can restore your voting rights.
Yeah, I'm okay with felons owning guns. I'm okay with felons getting the right to vote. So,
we're talking about a very specific case.
Well, if they can restore it, that's one thing. My question.
We are.
My question was more so like if you expect them to be able to handle that, what makes you think that they're going to be able to handle more? I got a little sidetracked there on that, but it was just something.
Well, they did arrest the guy within 48 hours or something. It was pretty quick. But, he was a nut job. And he was a nut job, and you're going to have nut jobs in the world, and that's why we need coercion.
Right. Well, I guess my whole point in saying that was that, it's kind of like you have with, the Florida thing, right? Like, you get this kid, do you need more red flags? Right, this guy's calling him bomb threats or doing this, so you have this apparatus that's there, supposed to be able to take care of this stuff.
He gets investigated 20 times by the police.
Right. One could make an argument that they're not doing the best, So... I guess that's what I'm trying to do.
In the words of Donald Trump, they're not sending their best people. Listen, they're not sending their best people.
Right.
Yeah, they definitely make mistakes, But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have police. It doesn't mean
we shouldn't have police. No anarcho-capitalist is saying we shouldn't have police. I
know, but as soon as you have police, it's like, okay, well, who decides what the police can do? Right? Who directs that coercive force?
We need police for the police.
They hire the people who hire them? I don't know.
Right. So that's why it's like murder for hire, right? It's violence for hire. So
but you think that people are just going to hire a bunch of people to murder each other?
Oh yeah.
And those companies are just going to take that. They're just going to take on these civil wars for no reason.
What are you basing this off of? We have mall cops and they don't go out and murder people.
Yeah. Do you have any empirical evidence to back up your claim or no?
No. You just have to understand. You have to think it through logically and understand that when somebody wants to get their way and they have the financial resources, they're going to get their way.
So I'm going to take that as a no. You don't have any.
What's an a priori?
No, I don't have any empirical resources because anarcho-capitalism doesn't exist. So we don't have any evidence of this non-existent system that we can say.
What are you talking about? I just showed you at Sharon in Mexico. We have 700 years of Gaelic Ireland of when they were doing that with the
Iceland too.
Iceland, yeah, we have all these.
None of these systems are narco-capitalist. If you look,
what are you talking about? With the two-auth system, Murray Rothbard wrote extensively on the two-auth system in Ireland. We worked for almost 1,000 years without a war.
That's a clan system. We don't.
What are you talking? That's a clan system. It was a clan system of private property. What do you think?
What about anarcho-capitalism rules out clans and tribalism?
Yeah. Where are you getting this?
As soon as you say, okay, well, this clan is going to dominate this area, anarchy. It's not individual sovereignty. It's a political organization.
But that goes back.
Well, if you are free to leave, then it's not really a coercive force.
That's like we were talking about.
I guess it would come down to how you define coercion and how you define aggression.
And how you define anarchy.
Yeah, that too.
Which is what happens when you have these communities form, and then they, through discovery and trial and error, they come up with these standards.
All right. Well, hey,
I really don't think about it that precludes that. It sounds totally unrealistic to me. And I would argue that Iceland and, all these examples you use are like from 1,000 years ago, and nobody really knows what they were like. But I don't.
One's happening right now. I literally told you about one happening in Mexico right now.
And I'm gonna look into this Mexico one.
I literally sent it to you over the messenger.
I want an apology. If they have any kind of government, if they have police, if they have laws, I'm going to call bullshit on you.
What do you mean laws that, their own private laws? Sure. What are they talking about?
There's no fucking such thing as private laws, dude.
There is, though.
Like, what is a private law?
I think there is.
The one that is not enforced by the state. The one that is not enforced through a monopoly.
You need power to write laws that other people have to obey.
Okay.
All right. I love you guys. I love you guys. Hey,
I can't just sit here and say, "Oh, this is the law that Caitlin has to follow now." Like that would be a private law.
But no one would listen to you.
Fuck I do.
The difference is no one would listen to you. Like people naturally,
and no one would listen to Ancaps because
sure they would, because
the position that they're in. You have no
because if they don't want to live in Ancap, they don't have to live in Ancap.
Naturally would come across their own type of laws that everyone wants to follow. No one, if you walked across, I would be willing to bet that if you walked through society, even today, you would look at them and say, does anyone agree that rape is okay? You would have people that naturally agree, like, listen, rape is not okay. Murder is not okay. Theft is not okay. These things naturally come across because people don't want to be violent towards one another. This idea that if you walked into a restaurant and told everyone that, hey, by the way, this restaurant right now has no laws whatsoever, you're good to go. Like even if the government came in and said, you don't have to follow the rules, then all of a sudden people just start getting up and stabbing one another. It's just absurd.
But TJ, some people are rapists. Some people are thieves.
What percentage? What percentage? That matters. That matters.
You're not going to stop them. You're not going to stop them.
Why not?
All of the Ancaps together aren't going to stop them.
You think that many people are rapists in society? I feel bad for you if you think that many people want to rape you, right?
There are some, and the fact that there are some
define some though. Define some.
They cannot be sovereign individuals. They need to be governed.
So make it.
No, they don't need to be governed.
Really easy to defend yourself and have no repercussions for defending yourself against that.
Yeah. What do you mean some? Is some 1 out of a million or some 100,000 out of a million? You think there's an army of rapists coming for everyone if we just got rid of rules tomorrow?
There's literally websites we can go to and get a rough estimation on how many.
Yeah, I mean, if you please pull the estimates because it is minuscule.
If you got rid of the police tomorrow, you would see a ton of crime. Absolutely.
A ton of crime. What is a ton of crime? Define a ton of crime.
You would see looting.
Honestly,
I would see a bunch of people smoking weed. Yeah, that's a crime right now. Yeah, a ton of crime. A bunch of people smoking weed in their basements. Sure.
You would see violent crime if it just came out.
Why are you so convinced of this? Do you have any empirical evidence of this?
Yeah, you could look at people. Look at the people that are in jail. There's lots of violent crime.
40% of them are for nonviolent crimes. I agree. 40% of people in jail are for nonviolent crimes.
You think like everybody's just going to get along? It's going to be all kumbaya.
I don't think, but see, you're straw man. I don't think people are going to just be kumbaya.
I think you're lumping us in with the insane ANCAPs that you see in your debate group. Like a lot of them are insane and they're super dogmatic and they have these very strict rules for how it's going to be in their little ANCAP society, and they're insane.
Like, I think you're grossly overestimating the people that want to be violent.
I think you're a utopian. To be honest, I think you're utopian.
Why? Because I literally told you.
I mean, realistically, I'm a minarchist.
An unrealistically rosy view of humanity, and you think everybody would just sort of get along.
But I don't. I've never said that. I've never said that everyone wants to get along.
You have no concept of violent crime, and you have no concept of political.
What are you talking about? I've been held up 4 times at gunpoint in my life. Like I understand violent crime. I'm just saying that is a minuscule part. If you think that everyone you cross paths with, like your Starbucks barista, just wants to stab you in the face, I feel bad for you.
That's a straw man. I don't think everyone does, but I think some people do.
Well, I do like to tell me how many? Who? When you say some people, what percentage? How many? Is it 30% or is it 0.3%? If we had a million people around you, how many people do you think want to violently attack you?
I would like to point out that
less than 1%.
Less than 1%. So because of less than 1%, we need a violent monopoly in
Yeah.
jail over nonviolent crimes like drug charges? Listen
Not
to
drug
yourself.
charges, but over real violent crimes.
But you're defending the state because of less than 1%.
Well, I mean, to be fair, like he is a minarchist, so I'm guessing the whole victimless crime thing is part of his philosophy. So it would just be violent crime.
Okay, but you're saying that because of less than 1% that you agree of, less than 1% of people want to attack you, we need to justify a state that very grossly, we have an endless supply of empirical evidence that they literally are aggressing against nonviolent people. How much, like the percentage of cops that aggress against people that are nonviolent is way more than 1%. And you're defending them because of maybe 1% of people might be violent towards you?
You can say that, but what you are not understanding is that probably 50% of the population supports that aggression because they are opposed to drugs.
Because they're taught in government-run education schools?
Okay,
yeah, sure.
Well,
I don't disagree with that.
That's what they believe. So I guess that puts our percentage of violent people up to 50%, not like 1% like we were saying.
So you think 50% of people are going to be violent? If we got rid of rules, you 50% of people are going to be violent towards you?
We're not getting rid of rules because they would just reestablish law and order immediately. Society would never tolerate this.
Where do you have evidence of this? Where do you have evidence of this? That doesn't happen in any kind of history.
We have a government, do we not?
Yeah.
And all these people, you try to repeal drug prohibition or get rid of the drug war, and you will see the opposition. A lot of people don't agree with these ideas.
Are you a minarchist, or do you want nothing to change?
What?
Because I understand the minarchism.
I understand it's a political battle.
I understand your arguments about minarchism, but the thing that confuses me is you've kind of got into the weeds a couple times here talking about it almost sounds like don't question the status quo because that's how it is right now and that's how it's going to be. But so which is it? Are you a minarchist?
It's a bullshit argument.
Are you a minarchist, or do you not question the state under any circumstance?
You're arguing principle, but then you're defending it by pragmatism. Yeah, I agree. This episode that I think there needs to be something like the Libertarian Party that leads people to the principle aspect.
Yeah, but your principles are wrong. That's the problem.
So then don't hide behind the pragmatic argument. Don't sit there and say that, tell me my principles are wrong. Don't sit there and say we have a government today. That's the pragmatic argument. You're arguing my principles are wrong, but you're defending it by some pragmatic view of the world today.
Yeah, but you'll make a case. You'll say, well, what percentage of people do you think would rob you if there was no government?
Well, to be fair,
and you even agree that it's less than 1%. Well,
because you're making claims. So he wants
realistically,
to make sure.
People would immediately reform a government because they don't want drugs to be illegal.
Maybe
and they want welfare.
My argument is that let those people do it.
First place, they would never allow you to abolish it in the first place because they like the laws the way they are.
You think that people like the laws? You think the majority of people like drug laws right now? I would be willing to wager that the majority not like the war on drugs.
No way.
If
people loved drug laws, then Republicans would be doing a lot better than they are.
Yeah, I think you are.
That's like a key.
Grossly underestimating what people want.
Most Democrats are running on abolishing drug laws in some sort.
We've got two states that managed, I think 2 or 3 that have managed to legalize just marijuana. And if you try to escalate it to meth and heroin, the opposition skyrockets. So, I mean, that's something where you're talking about empirical evidence. You can look at the empirical evidence and see that the public's opposition to drugs.
Okay,
now, I'm against the drug war.
These people
aren't going to accept the narco-capitalism where drugs are legal.
But there's a difference between saying something like, people would oppose it, and saying that my neighbor found out I was doing heroin on my couch on a Saturday would come over and stab me in the fucking face.
No,
you would do that? How many people do you think would come over and fucking stab me over
the face? They just call the police.
But if there was no government,
why is there going to be no police? Why aren't there going to be no police?
I said there was no government.
Get rid of the police. You're not.
I'm just saying. I'm not. You're arguing pragmatism over principle. So I'm talking about how many.
I live in reality. See, I'm just dealing with reality.
You're dealing with reality as you make fun of my principles. Don't you see the contradiction?
It's a fictitious world that doesn't exist. And it's just I don't know. I just think it's just ridiculous.
Caught me off guard.
Yeah, it's very ridiculous to make fun of principle while you're arguing pragmatism.
All right,
I agree.
All right, we're a little over an hour, you guys. This is fun. I hope everyone's in good spirits. This is good times.
Yeah, I love these debates. I love these.
I intended for this. I intended for it not to turn into a debate, but it was fun, so I just let you.
It was inevitable. It was going to happen.
Yeah,
Sure.
You can't put libertarians in a group together and ask them to talk about libertarianism without yelling at each other. Come on.
Sure. I do have one
It's
thing
all
to
good
say,
fun,
though.
Kyle. It's all good fun.
Yeah. Kyle's great. So I do have one question though, right? Like I do want to address this. I tried to address it before. Things are we're all talking. I try to keep down so we don't talk over each other. But I do have to say,
Caitlin just won't shut up.
Kyle,
Right.
I know, right? Kyle, did you really use prison as an example of anarchy? Like,
Well, I mean,
catch that, did he? I didn't catch.
I think he did.
I didn't
He's
catch that either.
you were like people are gonna do, when left to their own device, are gonna do whatever they're gonna do. I think maybe we can set the tape back and listen to it when it publishes. But I'm pretty sure you were like, people are gonna be violent and do whatever they do in the absence of this, that, and the other. Just look at prisons. And I'm like, wait, you mean the government establishment? I mean, some of them are private,
Yeah.
right? But they've all got
I caught that.
yeah, they've all got like government officials in them. They are all like adhering to laws where people's freedoms are greatly restricted by the state, right? And
Hearing the laws. You mean the laws that they can't even enforce in prison?
I was saying, look, there are people in prison who cannot be allowed to live amongst civilians. That was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, but if it's only 1% of the situation, but if it's only 1% of the population, we could handle that, no problem.
No, you can't.
All right. Well, look,
You
I was hold on. I was clarifying for the sake of the argument.
Right.
Kyle
Let's
clarified. Kyle clarified. That's fair enough.
Right.
This is great, though. I think this was a good, healthy conversation. I'd love to have you guys on again sometime soon, so we can do this more.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sometimes it's fun to just get through this stuff, Is there anything anyone wants to say? Caitlin, I feel like you were trying to get something. Is there anything you want to say before we get out of here? Hello? Is she gone?
Yeah, she gone.
Okay, fair enough.
I wonder if she got bored or mad.
Yeah, right. She just rage quit.
Maybe both, yeah. Is there anything you guys want to plug before we get out of here?
No. I would encourage everyone to check out Being Libertarian. Obviously, check out my column, Lowdown on Liberty.
Yeah, and remember to check out Kyle's group. He's got his anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism debate group, and you've got a page too, right, Kyle? You got a couple pages, but there's one page I know you like to try and point people toward.
Yeah, I run Misesians, which is it's not very active, but that's my biggest page, and then I'm in the Libertarian Party. I'm trying to steer it in the direction of minarchism. The party has obviously a lot of anarchists, but also a lot of moderates, and now it has socialists, and it's just a complete mess. So I encourage people that are principled to join the party and to try to make it better instead of running away from it. From a political standpoint, I think it's the best we got, or the GOP Liberty Caucus, but that's been hit or miss. So I don't know.
Kyle and I would agree on that
politically.
Yeah,
that kind of I don't agree with the socialists being there, and I would agree that people who are principled should join the party and turn that around very quickly.
Right.
Yeah, it is a numbers thing, and it's weird. You can't. It's like you can't just kick them out. It's kind of a tough thing. You have to actually outnumber them and outvote them, or they take over your message, and then Libertarian Party becomes ANCOM or whatever.
Yeah,
so,
fortunately, the socialists are showing the downside of the political, the political side of things, trying to get things done politically. Where that's why we need it gone altogether.
It's just the nature of humanity to form groups, and people that have similar ideas and align similar values end up joining together for strength, because individuals are very weak.
All right. Well, like I said, we'll get on and we'll get into all this again. I think it's good to end on a bit that you guys can agree on somewhat, given the tone of this. So. Also, Caitlin just messaged us. For some reason, she's having issues with her connection, so she's having trouble getting back in. So we'll just end it here. I just want to say thank you for everyone listening, for having the patience to get through us talking over each other here at spots. But it was, I feel, a lively and interesting discussion. And I'd also like to say thank you to the guests. I appreciate you guys giving your time to be here on the podcast and bicker about politics. And whether anyone likes it or not, we will probably be back again.